Right, so yesterday we had the first official press conference for the rematch between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. And without any further ado, I just want to get straight into it and give you lot my reaction.
I'm going to tell you right here and now, you ain't no champ. And you most definitely ain't no people's champ, so get that out of your head. You keep letting Eddie Hearn blow smoke up your and you're going to end up being even more of an embarrassment than he is.
So first off, Conor Benn was walking through the streets of New York City and he was getting beeped from cars. He was getting stopped, asked for photos, congratulated on the fight. So you can't deny the admiration for him was there. However, I do kind of think that at the same time, if Chris Eubank Jr. was to walk those same streets, he would probably have the same experience. He would probably get invited on the same shows that Conor Benn was invited on. And I do think that when you look at the shows that Conor Benn went to, when the camera cut to him and you heard the audience, there was definitely a turning of the tide somewhat, because I think following the controversy, a lot of people went off Conor Benn and weren't too high on him, whereas when the camera was cutting to him at boxing events that he was at, he was getting a big cheer from the crowd. And I definitely think that he clawed back a lot of the public's respect in that fight, because albeit in my opinion you are responsible for what enters your own body, you can't deny that Conor Benn went in there with a naturally bigger man and gave a really good account of himself, and we do give him respect for that. Ultimately, I think it's a case of a rare, albeit not unprecedented occasion, when at the end of a big fight, the estimation of both fighters go up.
These men are not men of the people. They are pretending. They're pretending to be the good guys. They will do anything they can. They will screw over anybody they can. They will cut any corners. They will break any rules they can to try and get ahead. Now, after the fight, due to severe dehydration, I'm put in an ambulance and I have to go to hospital. I'm in the ambulance and these scumbags blocked that ambulance from leaving the stadium for 20 minutes.
By the way, this is an intrigue. I'll keep going because this is all being noted because it's absolute waffle.
20 minutes.
Waffle.
Blocked in.
Waffle.
I'm laying there in a gurney, oxygen mask on, and the car cannot move. They will not open the gates to let us leave.
Now this is a controversial one, and I wasn't at the fight. I wasn't at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for the first showdown between these two, but I have been at many a big stadium fights, working for DAZN, working for the Pain Game, Netflix recently, and I've been to Wembley Stadium working twice, right? And the exit that we come out of, little bit of behind the scenes info for you guys, right? The exit that we come out of as part of the media credential team type thing is the same exit that the fighters come out of, the promoters come out of. It's the same exit where there's ambulances there at the ready if necessary. And I found in my experiences, the two Wembley shows I've done, one of the times the wait was just way too long to be able to drive out of that exit, so I literally walked down Wembley Way. Funnily enough, I walked down Wembley Way with Moses Atoma, which is a pretty cool story that I'm one day going to be able to tell my grandchildren. But the second time, I did stay in the car, and it took us probably an hour to get from the exit at Wembley Stadium just to the next road. Just to the next road. It literally took us an hour, and that was after Dubois Usyk. I don't know the logistics around the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and whether it's the same, but what I would say is if it's anything similar, then these things can happen, and I don't specifically think that Eddie would even have any involvement in that. I think it would more so be whoever runs the security for the Matchroom shows now, which I think's Gold Star. But yeah, it's not something that's been passed down from Eddie Hearn, in my opinion, to make Chris Eubank wait and suffer and things like that, because even financially, it doesn't make any sense. Eddie Hearn would want to put on a rematch. He knows it's very lucrative. So he would want Chris Eubank Jr. to come through that fight and, you know, be in a fit and healthy state.
Sorry, who won't open the gates?
Now, if this was a serious injury that I had sustained, that 20 minutes...
Chris, I want to know who wouldn't open the gates. It's important.
That 20 minutes...
You can't answer that, can you?
Could have been the difference between life and death.
You talk you do. Chris, can we get one thing clear? Can you just confirm that you are accusing us?
I am
Matchroom?
Or yes.
Okay, say it.
You guys
say it.
Me from
say it.
Out.
Say it.
You know,
Matchroom.
Who else? Who else
okay.
would it have been?
Go on, say it.
Why was
Why
was I in an ambulance?
Say that Matchroom stops you from going to the hospital.
Why was I what? So you can try and sue me?
Do you know what's funny, right? When you watch boxing for the most part of your life, like I have, you often are as interested in the characters inside the boxing game as the actual fights themselves. And in doing so, I've been able to see sometimes subtle and sometimes less subtle changes in so many fighters, managers, promoters and stuff like that. And this is something we're now kind of seeing from Eddie Hearn, in my opinion. I remember when Eddie Hearn used to wear the fact that he had never sued a fighter or taken a fighter to court almost as a badge of honour. And that can't be said now. That's not the case. You know, he had the lawsuit with Jake Paul. He sued him. I think that was actually settled financially outside of court. And I personally do feel like he is trying to put the exact words in Chris Eubank Jr.'s mouth here that gives him the ammunition to pull the trigger and to file a lawsuit against him. To be fair though, if I was the promoter and someone made that sort of specific allegation against me, not just like, you know, a derogatory term, calling someone a scumbag, something like that. If they made a specific allegation that I attempted to put their life in danger, I would feel very aggrieved by that. But when I mention the sort of subtle changes in personalities, I just think that back in the day, Eddie Hearn would have just rubbished the claims. He would have laughed them off. He would have maybe combated it with some wit and humour and things like that. Whereas nowadays, you don't see that as much. What I do know though is Conor Benn's been sat there pretty quiet for the most part of this press conference, and obviously the first time round we had that real deep cutting narrative between Chris Eubank Jr. and Chris Eubank Sr. There was a family feud there, and I don't think the public would buy into that a second time round. So that's why I always stated there would need to be some sort of narrative, something going on to gain as much interest as possible for this fight. And I believe that the beef between Eubank Jr. and Eddie Hearn has definitely done that. So although Eddie Hearn might feel very upset about what Chris Eubank Jr. is allegedly accusing him of here, at the same time as that, it is going to benefit Eddie, isn't it? Because it's making the fight bigger. And regardless of whether you agree with what Chris Eubank Jr. is saying or not here, I don't think there's any of you in the comment section below that would tell me that by doing this, he hasn't made the event bigger, and by making the event bigger, ironically, will earn Ed a lot more bread.
What I don't have is someone lying about what happened on the night to try and gain more popularity, about your weight cut, about all the you want to come out with. You're playing the victim. You're playing the victim. And we see through you.
Now, in this specific statement, Eddie says on the night, which should be noted. But I have seen other bits of media before where Eddie has accused Chris of trying to gain public sympathy from the weight cut and things like that. And that's not something that I agree with. I don't agree with Eubank Jr. trying to gain popularity by making out he's having this hard weight cut. Chris Eubank Jr. has been weight trained, in my opinion, for a couple of years now. A good few years, actually. All the way back to that first fight with Liam Smith. And that was a result of the cancelled fight, a day or two out, that I had a ticket to go and watch, between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. He struggled at that weight since then. He took on Liam Smith, right? He lost to Liam Smith. If he had a won against Liam Smith, I think he'd have moved back up to 168. However, within the contract terms, he had to take the fight at the same weight. So then he's got to fight again at that weight against Liam Smith. Now, after that, he then knows that a fight between Conor Benn behind closed doors has been signed, sealed, and delivered. And that meant that in the interim, in the meantime, he was going to have to take a fight. If he had gone up to 168, for that fight, it would have made the weight cut, including the rehydration clause, a lot more difficult, in my opinion. So I do think that you can be small at the weight, medium at the weight, big at the weight, but once you get past 30, it becomes harder. It becomes a lot harder. And I do think that Eubank Jr. has outgrown the middleweight limit. I saw him out in Saudi. I was there when he boxed Sarah's Matter. I was stood in the reception at one point, literally meters away from Chris Eubank Jr. and he did not look good. He didn't look good. I'm being honest with you guys. Like, he looked very, very weight drained in that one. But as much as I say this about the weight draining and, you know, the whole popularity debate, what we've got to remember here is the fact that Chris Eubank Jr. signed the contract. He did sign the contract. And I feel like once all the controversy happened with the adverse findings, failed drug tests, whatever you want to call it with Conor Benn, I feel like the ball was in Eubank Jr.'s court. And maybe had Ben Shalom not been negotiating the contract, maybe had Eddie been negotiating the contract and that was his fighter, he would have managed to negotiate a contract where there wasn't a rehydration clause. So ultimately, you do need to look at the team around you and yourself. And as bad as it sounds, accept the fact that you signed the contract.
Did I underestimate him? I did. I genuinely thought I'd knock him out 3-4 rounds on my heart. You know, that's well, Chris, shut up, mate. But, you know, he gave me one hell of a fight, and it was one hell of a fight. And, yeah, I'm excited for next time round, to be honest, mate.
Well, let's hear from...
You know, this was the first time in my life that I've ever seen a fighter lose and then go on some type of victory tour.
Eubank's a menace, isn't he? Like, look, Conor Benn is a fiery character, and obviously it's definitely worth noting, and we get on speaking to it in a bit, that Conor Benn's mood for this press conference wouldn't have been fiery, it wouldn't have been as uplifting as usual due to the tragic passing that I think the whole boxing world at this moment in time is still shocked by and mourning of a legend, not a boxing legend, just a British legend in Ricky Hatton, who Conor Benn was obviously quite close with. I think when he first came over from Australia, he was training at Ricky Hatton's gym, and maybe that's why we saw a more subdued version of Conor Benn. But at the same time, a presser needs selling, and Chris Eubank Jr. is the one that is selling this presser at this moment in time. And when you look at the old guard of boxing, now either retired or coming to an end, I'm talking the likes of Tyson Fury, Tony Bellew, David Haye, James DeGale, fighters like that, fighters that could really sell a fight at a presser. I now think that Chris Eubank Jr. is probably the best at selling a fight out of any British boxer that's active right now.
Chris put up a good fight, but to me, that was Conor at his worst. He was winging punches in, throwing them left, right, not even thinking about what he was doing. Everything that we practiced for the 12 weeks of training, he didn't do one thing. Absolutely one thing. And he had him hurt so many times, but yet he kept on showing all the punches that he was going to throw. And I thought to myself, mate, that wasn't even a real Conor.
Now, speaking of boxing royalty, Nigel Benn definitely falls into that category. And that means that when the Dark Destroyer speaks, I listen. And I actually agree with a lot of it. Conor wasn't at his best on the night. First time up at that weight, although he had boxed at the light middleweight limit over in America a couple of times when he was supposed to be banned or whatever. We won't get too much into that. And he was against a naturally bigger man, wasn't he? So I do think that Conor Benn deserves respect, but let's not paint it as if it was some kind of unfair fight, because Chris wasn't at his best. This wasn't the best version of Chris Eubank Jr. This wasn't the Chris Eubank Jr. that boxed in the Super Series against Avni Yildirim and against George Groves, even the Chris Eubank Jr. that fought Arthur Abraham. It was around that time that I thought we saw the best Chris Eubank Jr. in terms of a real blend of a great chin, great engine, and that relentless drive to win. And I don't think that this version of Chris Eubank Jr. is that version anymore. I also didn't agree with Nigel that Conor had Chris hurt multiple times in that fight. Obviously, there was that one left hook in, I think it was the second or the third round. It was the first couple of rounds, wasn't it? That visibly wobbled Chris Eubank Jr. But I would argue that maybe Chris Eubank Jr. had Conor Benn hurt more in that fight. I would actually argue that there was a moment in the fight when Chris Eubank Jr. realised that he had the capacity to be able to take Conor Benn's power a lot better than Conor Benn was able to take Chris's power, and therefore that's why you saw Chris start to back Conor Benn up to the ropes, push forward, take risks that, let's be honest, if Chris Eubank Jr. is in there with a Canelo or someone like that, he just ain't taking those risks. But I don't know, let's see what Chris Eubank Jr. thinks of this.
This old man's talking about he wobbled me 4 or 5 times.
Well, you just got to watch it. You just got to watch the fight. You just got to watch the fight. At no stage did you hurt me in there.
The delusion of these guys.
Well, just watch it. It's not delusion if you can physically see it, Chris.
It's breathtaking. It really is.
Oh, I'm not sure about Benn's claims that he was never hurt during that fight. I mean, listen, look, I'm not in Conor Benn's body. I don't know. Sometimes a shot can visibly look worse than it is. And what I would say is, I actually do rate Conor Benn as the more explosive puncher at this moment in time right now, due to Chris Eubank Jr.'s age and whatnot. But there was moments when Conor Benn was hurt in that fight. I think it was the 12th, maybe the 11th. I'd have to rewatch it back. But right towards the end, there was a moment when I actually thought that Conor Benn was seconds from getting stopped. He ate a monster left hook. Chris Eubank Jr. backed him up to the ropes. And you really do have to give Conor Benn his plaudits for coming through those sort of crisis moments in the fight. But to say that he had Eubank Jr. hurt multiple times, yeah, I don't believe that. Now, just quickly, before we get on to this last clip, this is definitely one of the most controversial parts of this whole press conference, and I actually struggled really, really hard to find it. I couldn't find it on Twitter. I don't know whether it was cut from the live stream, but I downloaded the original live stream and couldn't find it. But I have found a version of it. It is quite grainy, but let's have a look at it.
I mean, obviously, just a couple of... You might... Just going to say 30 seconds about Ricky Hatton.
No, there's no 30
Chris, 1 second.
You know the drill.
Chris.
You know the drill. I'm not going to say...
You are some arsehole, you are.
Anything you say.
Okay, then don't listen to any...
I'm a bad guy.
No.
I'm in this.
All I was going to do was say a few words about Ricky Hatton.
Okay,
words. Okay, I won't say anything about...
Move on with the press conference.
You're an arsehole. You talk shit. You get what's coming to you.
So from what I'm reading and gauging online, there's two ways that people are looking at this. The first is that Chris Eubank Jr. was massively disrespectful and should have just let Eddie Hearn speak and pay tribute to Ricky Hatton. And the second being that Eddie was actually using Ricky Hatton's passing as somewhat of an opportunity to speak, because he felt like Chris Eubank Jr., much like the last press conference and much like a lot of this press conference, wasn't going to let him speak. And look, I don't think that's the case. I honestly don't think that's the case. But just quickly, I want to take 1 minute to tell you guys about new partner of the channel, Nyla Apparel. I was lucky enough to be sent some clothes by these lot around a month ago, and I've got to be honest with you, since receiving them, they have become my go-to for both t-shirts and now for tracksuits. Now, I would not vouch for something unless I truly believed in the product, and anyone that's seen me out and about around town will know that I am am wearing the Nyla t-shirts all of the time. The first thing I noticed about them was how good the quality was, and then when speaking to the guys at Nyla, I found out that the money spent on material in comparison to what the actual t-shirts are sold for is probably about 10 times less than you would usually sell a t-shirt for that cost at. Basically, I'm of the opinion that they're spending about the same on materials as you do most t-shirts in flannels, but instead of paying 200 to 300 quid, you're paying about 10 times less than that. Instead, you're looking at £32 for the t-shirts, including free shipping, and just over £100 for the tracksuits. No shade thrown here, but the other day I had my eyes on a Nike tracksuit in JD Sports. I got it, I went to the checkout, and I was nearly at the point of having a heart attack when I found out that tracksuits, I always assumed back in the day growing up, were 100 quid. They're now costing over 200 quid, and these ones are exactly the same quality. So if you want a great fit at a great price for clothing that suits all occasions, hit the link in the description and browse the Nyla website. Thanks again to Nyla Apparel for their support with the channel. Let's get back into the video. I've only actually met Eddie Hearn once properly. I've you know, seen him around and stuff loads of times, but I've only actually met him to speak to once properly, and he seemed like a really, really nice guy, to be honest. I followed him from the start of his career, and obviously I can only really gauge my opinion on Eddie Hearn and him as a person, but I do think Eddie Hearn's a good person. And one thing I do know is Eddie Hearn had a relationship with Ricky Hatton. He took Campbell Hatton from his pro debut to his retirement, so therefore would have had a close relationship with Ricky Hatton. And listen, life and business is different. Just because I say that I believe that Eddie Hearn's a good guy in real life, it doesn't mean that he hasn't made bad business decisions. Like, I've probably not actually got enough inside scoop, definitely not that I tell you on here, either way, to know, but there's been kind of recent dramas between himself and Joe Cordina, a few other fighters, obviously now looking like he's going down the route of sometimes suing fighters, which is something that in the past he had laughed off, and there are business decisions that I do feel Eddie Hearn got massively wrong, you know, still trying to push through with the original fight, not the first fight that actually happened, the original set date between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, after he had already been informed about the adverse findings in Conor Benn's test. However, what I do know is, aside from business, Eddie Hearn's a compassionate man. He's a family man. He's a man who cares about the people in his life. Like, I remember an interview I watched of Eddie Hearn after the passing of Patrick Day, and he was really emotional, and it was authentic. I could tell it was authentic. Look, I'm of the opinion that Eddie wasn't using Ricky Hatton's name as an in, so to speak, to try and get his word heard or get his voice over Chris Eubank Jr.'s. But at the same time, I can see why Chris Eubank Jr. might feel that. Although I do think he's wrong here, Eddie has had limitless opportunities to speak about Ricky Hatton. There was literally a large portion of the press conference that was designated to paying homage and tribute to Ricky Hatton, as it should have been. So I can kind of understand where Chris Eubank Jr. is coming from, although I don't agree with that, if that makes sense. I mean, it kind of sounds like I'm sitting on the fence, isn't it? So I'll give my actual opinion on it. In a nutshell, right, if I was Chris Eubank Jr., I would have done what Conor Benn did when Chris Eubank Jr. brought up the tragic passing of his brother Sebastian Eubank, which was sit there, stay silent, and let Chris Eubank Jr. talk about his brother. That's what I would have done if I was Chris Eubank Jr., but I'm not Chris Eubank Jr., and I'm not going to criticise the actions of another man when I'm not in the mind of that man. I'm definitely not privy to as much information that Chris Eubank Jr. has of Eddie Hearn. So it's one of those ones. I really do feel like it's one that you lot are going to have to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below on. Was Eddie using Ricky Hatton's name? I don't think he was. Or You know, do you agree with Eubank Jr? Let me know in the comment section below. But I do think that to cap this video off, this is personally the time that I want to pay my tribute to Ricky Hatton. Now, I obviously don't remember watching the Hitman live from his debut. I would have been too young. But what I do know is once Ricky Hatton went over to America and started taking a legion of fans, something that I don't know can be replicated by any UK fighter anytime soon, I was about 12, 13, something like that. And there was a good run of 3 or 4 fights when I remember me and my brother Billy, we would get up in the middle of the night and we'd sit there and we'd watch his fights. And those are memories that I really do think will last with me forever. And I think that he gave so many people memories that will last forever. Ricky Hatton was a man of the people. He was the boy next door. He was someone everyone could relate to. He was someone that was open with his struggles. And he was someone that even days before his passing was sending messages of support to children that were being bullied at school and stuff like that. And I don't know, I think like even the younger generation that watch boxing now probably don't realise just how good Ricky Hatton was. You know, you look at his most memorable fights and they would be probably for the younger generation, Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. However, that win over Kostya Tszyu, like, that wasn't supposed to happen, people. That was not on the cards. And I think that is something that really, really goes underrated. Maybe not amongst the boxing hardcore and the older fans, but definitely against the younger audience and inside and outside of the ring, man. Ricky Hatton just gave so much to the community, to boxing, to everything. So I really, really want to pay my respects to an absolute legend. As I say, not a legend of boxing, not a legend of sport, just a legend in life, in my opinion. And I'd urge you lot to do the same in the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts on the video itself, and obviously if you want to pay any tribute yourself to Ricky Hatton, then feel free. So listen, stay safe, people. I'll see you all in the next one.